It's time now for America Decides. The US presidential election is now less than a week away, with the opinion polls predicting an upset for President Donald Trump against his Democratic rival Joe Biden. But these are the same polls that had Donald Trump behind 4 years ago against Hillary Clinton. Well, we'll be covering all of this with the help of the British journalist Ian Woods, who has covered 4 previous presidential elections. Thanks again for being with us in the studio. I'm also joined from Minnesota by the Republican political strategist Amy Koch. And from Washington, we are talking to the Professor of American Politics at the American University, Alan Lichtman. Thanks very much indeed, both of you, for being with us. So the last week has seen both Trump and Biden crisscrossing the country in a bid to win over voters in the crucial battleground states. The US president held a campaign rally in Nebraska, where he's insisting against all the evidence that his administration is winning the fight against coronavirus.
We will vanquish the vaccine and we will get rid of this whole thing. We will get rid of this virus. It'll be you watch. It's going to happen very quickly. And we're going to have our country back, and the whole world is going to be coming back. This was a terrible, terrible thing that happened.
Well, Amy Koch, let's talk to you first. This narrative that COVID has been defeated by President Trump rather goes against what everyone else is seeing.
Well, and it does. And the president is actually here today. He's coming to Rochester, Minnesota, home of the Mayo Clinic, where they are working very hard on treatments and vaccinations. And they take the pandemic incredibly seriously in Rochester. His original rally was supposed to be much bigger, thousands. And as of right now, it's been downsized to about 250 with social distancing in place, and it will take place at the Rochester airport. Additionally, former Vice President Biden is in Minnesota today, and he is also doing a much smaller get-together. But we have both candidates in the state of Minnesota because our polls have been, running fairly tight, which is a surprise to everyone.
Well, let's talk about Joe Biden then. And he is still hammering home the message that Donald Trump has failed America over the coronavirus. And this week, he was in the southern state of Georgia, which the Democrats last won in 1992. Biden outlined his policy on tackling an outbreak which has killed over 225,000 Americans.
Last few months, there's been so much pain, so much suffering, so much loss in America. More than 225,000 dead Americans because of COVID-19, 7,800 right here in Georgia. And millions of people are out of work, on the edge. They can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. Donald Trump has waved the white flag, abandoned our families, and surrendered to this virus. But the American people don't give up. They don't give in, and surely they don't cower, and neither will I. I will put in place the plan to deal with this pandemic responsibly.
And Alan Lichtman, does coronavirus have the potential to be a vote winner for the Democrats?
All this campaigning, according to my prediction system, the 13 keys to the White House, which has been correct since I predicted Ronald Reagan's reelection in April 1982, 2.5 years ahead of time in the midst of what was then the worst recession since the Great Depression, suggests that campaigning really doesn't matter. What matters is the fundamentals of incumbent strength and performance, which my 13 keys gauges. And the way it works, if 6 or more of the keys turn against the White House party, they are predicted losers. Totally nonpartisan system. I've predicted going into this year 4 Republicans, 5 Democrats. I predicted Donald Trump's win in 2016. Which did not make me very popular in 90% Democratic Washington, D.C., where I teach at American University. And while I don't have a pandemic key, the pandemic has contributed to the critical loss of 3 other keys for Donald Trump. The short-term economic key, gauged by an election year recession, the long-term economic key, because despite the third quarter rebound from much lower base, the negative growth has pulled down the average, and the social unrest key because of what was raging across the land. As a result of this, Donald Trump went from just 4 keys down and what looked like a possible win, 2 keys short of defeat, to 7 keys down. So my final prediction is based on the fundamentals of the election, not on the ups and downs of campaigning, is that Donald Trump will become the first sitting president since Bill Clinton beat George H.W. Bush in 1992 to lose a re-election bid. And I don't think I'll get another note from him like I got last time after I predicted his win. Professor, congrats, good call, and in big Sharpie letters, Donald J. Trump.
Well, we love a prediction. Thanks very much for that, Alan. I wonder if we can read anything into, though, the fact that Joe Biden, we heard him speaking in Georgia there, President Trump's been in Nebraska. This election is seeing candidates in places you wouldn't normally expect them to be. We are really going to see these battleground states coming into play this time.
Well, you're seeing a much broader map than you saw last time. A lot of states that Donald Trump won pretty easily, like Georgia, Iowa, Ohio, and amazingly Texas, are in play, along with North Carolina. And the thing is, Trump has to win all of them, and they're all toss-ups. If Biden wins any one of the big states, Florida, North Carolina, Ohio, Texas, it's over. There's no map for Donald Trump. So stepping outside of the keys, it is an expanded and tough map for the president.
And Amy, you are in a battleground state too. 4 years ago, it was a very different story, wasn't it? The Democrats have made inroads where you are.
Well, the Republicans have made definite inroads, is what has happened. We are a blue state. We have been blue since 1972. Right. We've never voted. We were the one state that voted for Mondale. So, but last year the president got within under 45,000 votes. He came very, very close to winning the state of Minnesota. The polls actually look very similar to what they did last time. I agree with Alan on the fundamentals. I actually also called the president last time around against most people. And I think the fundamentals are important. What I would point out is I am in Minneapolis. I am at the ground zero for the unrest, which came about because of, yes, the pandemic contributed, but certainly what was happening with police and racial tension contributed to that. Sure. And it's not exactly playing against the president, as you might think, because of the large defund the police movement, which stepped out very quickly and has frankly got a lot of folks in the African-American community and communities of color across the Minneapolis and St. Paul area very concerned, as well as, people across the state of Minnesota. So I really appreciate your keys. I just think that unrest isn't necessarily playing that way, as well as the long-term economic forecast, which we saw bump up to within 3.5% of where we were in 19 at the end of 19, when certainly that key was turned for him. So obviously we've taken a hit on the short term. And we're seeing that in every one of these battleground states. It's going to matter in Pennsylvania. It's going to matter. We see it happening in Michigan, and it certainly matters here in Minnesota. And that is what I'm watching closely. I think this one is, at this point, a little close to call. And the national polls don't mean a darn thing. It's all about the battlegrounds.
Well, Ian
I stand by my prediction. Real quick. But I have to say, Amy has given some very shrewd analysis. It's one of the best analysis I've seen on behalf of the president. Very, very, very well done.
I enjoy your keys.
Well, Ian Woods, I wanted to talk to you more generally about the concept of battleground states. We talk about them a lot, but what are they exactly and how much do they really matter? It sounds like from Amy, she gave an example of why they do matter, but talk us through what the point of them is. Why do they matter to an election like this?
Well, they change quite often between elections as well. I mean, we didn't really think of the Rust Belt states as being swing states a few years ago. We didn't really think that places like Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania would go into Donald Trump's camp, but they did narrowly by less than 1%. So now, of course, they are very much battleground states. But Alan used to be in Virginia, probably still lives in Virginia. Virginia used to be a very solidly, reliably Republican state. Now, because of the northern suburbs close to Washington, D.C., it's become very, very heavily Democratic, and therefore it's seen as a very safe seat for Joe Biden, state for Joe Biden. So these things do change over time. But I do find it interesting that, for example, on Monday, Joe Biden is going to apparently spend the last day of campaigning along with Kamala Harris in Pennsylvania. So he still doesn't think that, despite apparently a polls showing narrow leads for him in Pennsylvania, he still feels it's really necessary to campaign there very, very hard right up until the last possible moment. It's got 20 electoral college states. That's why it's so important. Some of these battleground states are quite small by comparison. I mean, when you think at places like Wisconsin is important, but it's only got 10 electoral college votes. Pennsylvania, far more important. Pennsylvania really should be Biden territory. It's his home state. He keeps on telling us about growing up in Scranton, Pennsylvania, even though he did become a senator for a neighboring Delaware. But he still doesn't think it's in the bag. I'm fascinated to see what's going to happen in Texas. We'd never dream that Texas would be considered a battleground state. It hasn't been won by a Democrat since Jimmy Carter in 1976, and he was a Southern governor, so he had some play in that part of the world. But now you've got Kamala Harris campaigning there. If the Democrats really thought it was in play, I'm sure we'd have seen Joe Biden there. But more people have now voted in advance of this election in Texas than voted in the entire election 4 years ago. I'm just fascinated to know, and we'll find out on Tuesday night where those votes have gone.
Absolutely. And as you say, we have only got a few more days of campaigning left before the election. What else caught your eye in these final days?
Well, I was intrigued this morning when I woke up to see that Donald Trump at 3 o'clock in the morning was still tweeting heavily. You've got to admire the man's stamina. But what caught my eye this week was that his 83 million followers will have seen this tweet comparing his packed rallies to Joe Biden's socially distanced ones. Though I suspect the split screen is the work of a member of his team rather than the president himself. But I was interested in which tweets get the most likes. And it seems that his supporters approve most when he's complaining about alleged pro-Biden media bias. This one picked up more than 300,000 likes. Joe Biden followers, on the other hand, and there are only 11.5 million of them, like it when he tweets simple messages like this one about following the advice of scientists, or this one about the importance of wearing masks. That's a message, of course, which you've seen largely ignored at Trump rallies. But Joe Biden's most popular tweet of the week, picking up 400,000 likes, one word, 4 letters, vote. And apparently lots of people are taking notice because so far more than 80 million people have already voted in this election. Extraordinary figures.
Absolutely. Can't wait to find the final figure of voter numbers when we actually eventually do get to that point. Well, let's take a look now at 2 issues that have dominated the headlines. The polls show Biden now has a commanding lead against Trump when it comes to white suburban women, the same group that helped Trump win the White House back in 2016. This is the US president making a pitch for that vote during an earlier rally.
Suburban women, will you please like me? Remember? Please. I saved your damn neighborhood, okay?
So, Amy Koch, does that kind of rhetoric win you over?
No, it doesn't. We're going to need a little more than that. And I've been saying that for quite some time from President Trump. He's going to need action behind that. We are very concerned about the pandemic. We're concerned about our kids not being able to go to school. We're worried about our parents and what's happening to them in assisted living homes. We actually need you to address things and not just say, hey, just like me. We're not falling for that.
I agree with everything Amy said, but you missed one of the most tone-deaf pleas I've ever heard from a president of the United States, which he says, we are going to put your husbands back to work. Come on, this is not 1950. We have a workforce that's evenly divided between men and women. This old idea of the husband being the breadwinner and the nice wife being the homemaker has been obsolete for decades. Where has he been living?
Well, Amy, I wanted to pick up on Alan's point there. Do you think he is stuck in the past? Is he pitching this right, the tone?
Well, I mean, certainly we can't ignore the fact that that former Vice President Biden is in the exact same boat. Frankly, I watched the debates on these things, and I'm just, kind of surprised that this is where we are. That's how I feel. That's how a lot of my friends feel, is just, kind of really. But no, just like any voter, suburban women, communities of color, folks that Trump is trying to bring further into the tent, we're going to need some action on things. And there, and a strong economy overcomes a lot of that. But we're worried now. The short-term outlook is very is concerning. And we have a bump up, but that's not confirmed. And I think fourth quarter is going to be a little rougher because with the spikes in the pandemic, we're going to start to see shutdowns again, potentially, and slowing, and people that have stuck their heads out going to restaurants that are going to be back at home. And so, those are the things that we need attended to. We don't really fall into the rallies, and we don't, whether it's Biden or Trump, we don't really see ourselves in these candidates.
We've talked a little already about high voter numbers for this election on November the 3rd. A record number have already voted early, But mail-in voting is proving to be a controversial issue, which could lead to a visit to the Supreme Court. Joe Biden voted early, but in person in his hometown of Delaware, where he accused the US president of lying about drug prices.
We just voted, and Jill's off to do an interview. But thanks for taking the time to cover it. And as we are, American people think drug prices are too high. Even the president, he continued to lie about it, even the president acknowledged early on that he thought Medicare should be able to negotiate drug prices to lower prices overall. He hadn't done it. He doesn't mean it. But there's a lot of Republicans that do mean it. So I'm confident we can get it done.
So, Alan Lichtman, we've already had one prediction from you, but what's your prediction about whether this will eventually end up in the Supreme Court?
Well, I think it's possible. It depends upon how close the election is. You know, I think there are some Republicans, I'm sure Amy is not one of them because she seems very shrewd, that the Supreme Court's just going to hand the election over to Donald Trump once Amy Coney Barrett decides to take part. I don't think that's true at all. I think the Supreme Court will only play a role if the election is very close and there are some real legitimate issues, like there was in 2000 when there was a legitimate issue about how long the recount could take place.
Yeah, quite right. I would think that I don't think that the Supreme Court is going to step in and there's going to be malfeasance in this unless, as it said, there's a constitutional question that needs to be answered. I also don't think that there's widespread fraud going on. I don't believe that at all. That's just not shown in any of the things like I've studies, whether they're conservative or liberal, they don't show that. We want to make sure it's done and handled with full integrity. That's important. Eyes need to be kept on it. But there's sort of fear mongering on both sides that I don't think is really helpful at this point, because it actually erodes the trust that the American people have in our electoral system. And we need folks across the country to get out there and vote. That's the most important thing.
Amy, can I check that you are indeed voting for Donald Trump? Because you sound completely different from most Republicans that I've heard over the last few weeks in terms of the talking points.
I've already voted, and I'm not sharing who I voted for, but I've already voted.
Well, good to hear you're taking part in the democratic process, whichever way you voted. But Ian, this is, we say this often about elections, this is shaping up to be another extraordinary election, particularly the fact that given whatever the result happens to be, there's the potential that we may not know the result because of a Supreme Court challenge.
Well, we might not know the result because the votes might not have all been counted in time. I mean, sometimes we get the impression that the American results are fairly instantaneous because they are called by TV pundits and electoral analysts. It takes days to count all the votes, but sometimes states are declared with only a fraction of a percentage of the votes actually cast. I don't think that's going to happen particularly in states where it's particularly close. So therefore, we might not know for 24 hours perhaps or something like that. And then if it is close, then it could indeed go to the Supreme Court. I mean, people have been focusing on Donald Trump saying in the past that he might not accept the result of the election. I just remind everyone that Democrats have not necessarily been rushing to accept the results of elections sometimes. I remember being in Boston in 2004 when John Kerry was expected to concede at about 2 o'clock in the morning on a very cold night in Boston, and instead sent out his vice presidential candidate, John Edwards, instead to say, hang on, guys, we're going to make sure all the votes are counted. He didn't actually concede until the following morning, about 6 or 7 hours later. And of course, Al Gore fought Florida for weeks afterwards. So just because Donald Trump doesn't necessarily immediately say, the game's up, I've lost, I don't think we should read too much into it. Let's see what happens once all those votes are counted and it becomes absolutely apparent how the result is going to play out. Then I think we may have a problem. And the problem being that Donald Trump, as he keeps on telling us, is not a politician. He's not used to losing elections because he's only ever fought one and he's won one. And he's a man who doesn't like losing. So let's see how he reacts if indeed all the polls show and the Supreme Court agrees that he has lost the election.
And talking of the Supreme Court, we've obviously had a new Supreme Court judge voted in this week. What kind of impact might that have?
Well, clearly that's now a 6-3 Conservative majority on the Supreme Court. And I have to say I'm a little bit surprised, and I don't know whether our other guests agree, that when it happened, when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died a month ago, I tended to think that this was going to be a hugely contentious issue. It was going to dominate the election campaign. It might even go beyond the election. It might well be that the Senate didn't actually confirm the vote until after the presidential election had been concluded, and indeed after we knew that there was going to be potentially a Democratic majority in the Senate. It kind of fizzled out as a bit of an issue, didn't it, Amy?
Yeah, I am completely with you, Ian. I absolutely thought when I heard the news, I couldn't believe it at first. And then I thought, oh, this is going to shake up the entire election. And it largely hasn't. There was a bump immediately after. And then there was some energy just as the as Supreme Court, as Amy Coney Barrett was confirmed. There was another bump in fundraising for the DFL. But there's also been a lot of enthusiasm on the Republican side for this Supreme Court justice. So it's been surprisingly quiet, in my estimation.
And Alan Lichtman, what do you think would happen? You were going to give me your view anyway, but I wonder what you thought would happen if this vote result does end up in the Supreme Court.
Let me make a few points. One, it again shows the importance of the fundamentals. The appointment and the confirmation didn't turn a key and didn't affect the outcome of the election. Next point I want to make is there is absolutely no legal requirement that an election be decided on election night. Numerous elections have been decided long after election night. Most notably, 2000 wasn't decided until the Supreme Court ruled on December 12th, more than a month after the election. In 2016, the election was not decided until Thursday after the election, when Woodrow Wilson won California by 3,773 votes. Final point is that it doesn't matter whether Donald Trump concedes or not. That's a tradition, but it has no legal standing. Once the electoral votes are counted, whoever has a majority becomes the president on January 20th, 2021, no matter what the losing candidate may think. If Donald Trump loses, he will probably go to his grave saying, I really won, I was cheated out of it, but it won't matter.
OK, Alan Lichtman and Amy Koch, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the programme. In our continuing series Across America, we visit Nashville in Tennessee, the site of the final debate between President Donald Trump and his rival Joe Biden. The city took a big economic hit when the pandemic happened, but it's now beginning to recover. Robert Ray reports from the state capitol.
Nashville has been called Music City since the 1950s. More than 180 live venues play tunes 5 nights a week. Elvis Presley recorded over 200 of his songs here.
You meet people from all over the country and all over the world here.
Stefan Superti is one of over 60,000 people in the music business here in Nashville. When COVID-19 came to town, the lively crowds, music, restaurants, and hotels went silent. Everything was locked down.
The second week of March, I lost like $1,200 worth of work within a couple days because all the hotels shut down. I got some financial assistance through Music Cares, which is part of the Grammy Foundation. I was just sitting at home for 3 months there for a while, and it was rough.
Despite a recent increase in COVID-19 cases, Nashville is beginning to look and feel a lot like itself again. Many tourists have returned, filling the streets and establishments. But one thing that stands out on the famous Broadway street is the amount of Donald Trump signs and people selling hats and shirts in support.
Trump 2020.
I just feel like he's a stronger man and he's got our best interests in his mind.
Rachel Gray runs a country western store downtown. They have been struggling to get back to pre-COVID business.
We need a strong president into the office that will help with our economy and help with the welfare situations and just moving forward with this whole COVID. I mean, we need to focus on more important things than put a mask on our face.
As President Trump and his motorcade headed to last Thursday's debate, many people lined the streets. Darcy Green was one of them and wants life to get going again. She and many others say they have suffered tremendous loss during the pandemic.
Well, I'll tell you what, I have 3 personal friends that are musicians that have killed themselves in the last 6 months. With the bars being shut down, where they make their living and unable to get unemployment with no money coming in. It's been hard.
3 hours to the east are the Great Smoky Mountains. Like Nashville, life is starting to return to some normalcy. Now, according to the polls, this area is voting for the re-election of Donald Trump. And that really goes for most of the state of Tennessee. But that doesn't mean that everyone has to agree on that opinion. As a matter of fact, if you look back at the history of the state, when they started voting for presidents back in 1796, they've gone for a Democrat 25 times and voted for a Republican 17 times.
Typically, I voted Democrat, so I think that's what I'm going to do this year because, not only my biggest concern is the economy, but I think the current president that we have has kind of created an environment of division.
Back in Music City, guitar riffs and drum beats echo down the streets, as do preachers standing on stepladders.
Is that you are a heinous, wicked criminal in the sight of God.
Expressing yourself is as common as hearing live music here. Freedom of speech is important to Tennesseans, and many have hope for America in the coming months.
I mean, people come together, this whole, separation of colors and race, it shouldn't be. We're one country. We should be pulling together and get our economy moving forward instead of backwards.
The ring of fire.
In Tennessee, Robert Ray, TRT World.
Okay, Ian Woods, thanks very much indeed for joining us for this edition of America Decides.